And so the basic practice is we sit with our hands in our laps and our eyes closed, and our backs relatively straight, but not so rigid that we will start to get a little cramp. We kind of sit relaxed but alert. And then the only instruction is whenever you think of anything, whenever you get engaged with any thought, even if the thought is about God, even if the thought is about Christogenesis, ever so gently return to your word. That's all you do. You may say the word once in 5 minutes. You may say the word 1,000,000 times in 5 minutes. That's okay. The only point is to return ever so gently to your sacred word. And otherwise, it's simply silence. So I'm going to invite you to take a few deep breaths and close your eyes. That very, very brief introduction. I'll time us, and I'll hit the gong to signal the beginning of our 20 minutes of silence, and then I'll hit the gong to signal the end. So please close your eyes, take a big deep breath. Take a rest from thinking. Just be. Just silence. Just take a big deep breath. Root ourselves in the present moment and move into the future.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. The second part of our talk this afternoon is going to pick up on some of the questions that were raised in the box here, and that is where our minds are and where they may be going with AI, and from there we'll move into the interior universe. Just to kind of recap something that Teilhard wrote back in the 30s, he said, people are looking for a religion of humankind and of the earth, which gives meaning to human achievements, a religion that will kindle cosmic and human evolution and a deep sense of commitment to the earth. So again, just to what we were saying this afternoon, Teilhard saw that religion and evolution belong together. And, you know, again, the religious dimension of our lives affects the direction of evolution itself and our choices for life in an evolving universe. Now, part of the difficulty is that, as Margaret Wertheim, a science writer, has pointed out, modern science has, in a sense, dismantled our Western understandings of sacred space. In her words, leaving God, heaven, and the souls of the dead with no particular place to go. We need a space for spiritual transcendence. And so, in her view, the understanding of and mastery over physical space has meant a loss of spiritual space in the physical world. And I think she really has put her finger on a deep, in a sense, a deep-rooted problem in our own age. We have lost a space of transcendence. And that new space has been, in a sense, cyberspace. Interestingly, technology emerged around the same time as the ecological movement, but it has, in a sense, taken off at an incredible exponential pace. And that's because I think cyberspace allows us to, in a sense, stretch ourselves in any way we want, right? We can, in a sense, we can fall in love online, as in her. We can be an avatar. We can just live out our dreams and imaginations. And so we do find ourselves today sort of addicted, if not just co-opted in some ways, by technology, to the point where people are now talking of our devices as our second selves, as Sherry Turkle did in her book, The Second Self. So that we are, in a sense, living exoskeletal lives. And as one writer says, actually this could be Turkle, we are in a process of making one another disappear by living more and more of our lives apart from other humans and in the company of machines. And studies also show today that one of the greatest, the funny thing is, the irony of it is that, okay, this could be an accident here waiting to happen. Technology was meant to connect us, and yet what we find today is loneliness is on the rise. We're more connected and more disconnected at the same time than ever before, which is quite interesting. So we are, in a sense, in a sort of digital dualism. If I go back here, in a sense, our bodies are here, our minds are elsewhere. All you have to do is go to a meeting, right, where you really don't want to be there, and everyone's sort of flipping through, checking their calendars, their emails. Students do this. If they don't really like your class, they'll kind of go like this. And so we have this, I'm present, I'm not present. I'm present in body, I'm not present in mind or spirit. Now, the interesting thing, and this would take an entirely a different conversation, much more detailed, but I think it's important to recognize that what scholars are realizing is that cyberspace now fills a psychological, religious void in modern life. Whereas church used to be our gathering space, now cyberspace and social media sites are the new gathering spaces. And there's a lot of writings on religion and technology today that kind of spell this out in different ways. One of the tenets of transhumanism, which is the movement that says technology will enhance us, it can move us to the next level of a better life, we can live longer, we can live happier, we can be smarter, we can be more democratic or whatever. But what transhumanists say is technology fulfills what religion promises. Again, Robert Gerasi has shown the deep connections between technology, especially American technology, and Christianity and the Judeo-Christian tradition. That technology is actually based on two fundamental concepts, salvation and immortality. Rather than waiting for us for a divine savior, we can now save ourselves, it says, through technology. Rather than being threatened by death, we can now overcome the death barrier. And so we find with technology the moves today to kind of prolong life, download your brain, take a pill to extend yourselves. But, all of this to say very briefly is that technology is actually shifting, and now studies do show that it's affecting the human brain. The brain is being rewired. So I always say younger generations, they look like us, but they don't think like us, They think in very different ways. Because one thing it does is that technology, in a sense, creates like a mental wormhole, where the information is traveling from one to the other without crossing any sort of space-time coordinates. So that shifts, in a sense, even our geographical understandings of ourselves, our location in space-time. In the old days, you might have a map. and you might look and you might be going, oh, where are we? So we're on the corner of Van Ness, but now I'm listening to my GPS system. I could be in Ohio, and it just says you have arrived. Technology is, in a sense, as we know, thinning out our interiority. Because we spend now so much of our waking hours on a device or online, we, in a sense, look for what we used to look for interiorly now outside ourselves in cyberspace. So we have this, what Nicholas Carr calls this kind of pancake phenomenon. We're becoming spread wide and thin as we connect with the device. And therefore, I think it's also impacting our sense of transcendence. Religious transcendence is now supplanted by techno-transcendence. You can become more than what you are in this way. Log on, choose an avatar, go to Second Life, and find your happiness. So here's the thing, and here's, I think, really what's at stake, and it's right out of the scriptures. Where your mind is, there your treasure lies. And today, we find our minds, in a sense, all over the place in cyberspace. And it is a question, well, where is our treasure? And what is our treasure? Are we even conscious of what that is anymore? And here is where I do think the mystics can, in a sense, lead us back to a more wholesome connection with the whole cosmic universe itself. Again, as we said before, the primacy of materiality may indeed be consciousness itself. The outer universe is, shorthanded speaking, driven by the inner universe. So where your mind is, there's where the rest of you lies. And if we are cutting out our inner universe, we're cutting out our level of consciousness, then that outer universe has a blind future, a blind destination. And that's our greatest fear, I think, today. We don't know where we're going. We have no sense of it. And we fear, I think one of the questions, and I will read the questions, will we create robots who rise up against us? Will we create technologies that, destroy us? The mystics chose a different path, right? They choose that level of the inner universe. And here, of course, we have Francis of Assisi and the Buddha. I always had to put Francis in, when I can. But I mean, his sense, he's not really known in the tradition so much as a mystic, but he truly was, if you study his writings. This kind of, and here I can say from Francis, and certainly for the Buddha as well, they made choices for their lives. And I think this is one of the lessons, we can't have it all. We need to make radical choices for our lives. What do we want? What do we want personally? What do we want collectively? And then after they made that choice, they focused their mind on their decision. And so, with Francis, he, in a sense, moved away from a comfortable lifestyle in suburban Assisi, so to speak, and he made a radical decision, to follow Christ, with the total renunciation of material things, the kind of itinerant lifestyle that he lived. But he trained his mind. We cannot move into a sustainable future of life without, in a sense, regaining that the mind, and here, not the brain, in a sense, as the hard, the hard material, the structures of the mind, but it can be trained, it can be focused. And so what we find with the mystics is that the minds create the world, not the other way around, and this is very consonant with what physics is telling us today. Consciousness, in a sense, impacts matter rather than matter giving rise to consciousness. Ken Wilber, that very insightful American philosopher, speaks about transpersonal evolution and has spent a lot of time to talk about the mystics who discovered their higher levels of being through an expansion and evolution of their own consciousness. And again, we are constantly looking towards the outer world of evolution and not really attentive to the inner world of evolution, that expansion of consciousness, where Wilber speaks about the subconsciousness of matter and body, in the sense that matter and body do have an awareness. Consciousness is not something that's just located here. It's in the field of everything that we are. That subconsciousness moving into self-consciousness of mind and ego giving rise to a super consciousness of soul and spirit. Consciousness, the expansion of consciousness is, in a sense, the unification on higher levels, the integration of that consciousness, insofar as the more integral it is, the more unified is space for us and the things of within space. So, we find today the language of awakening the brain, and this is not, again, what we're realizing from neuroscience is the plasticity of the brain, right? The brain can be retrained. It can be disciplined in the same way we discipline our bodies, right? We run races and we work out. We go biking and then we fall, But we never talk about training the soul. We never talk about really disciplining the spirit. That's how the ancients did it, right? That's how we have the great mystics of the traditions, because they made conscious efforts and they trained themselves to focus their minds, meditation, the reshaping of their thoughts, focusing their thoughts on peace, compassion, forgiveness, making a choice, what we call today a neuro-choice, for life. And so what we find with the mystics is that inner reality begins to govern outer reality, right? The mystics are living from a different level of consciousness. They're living from this inside the universe rather than just sort of coping outside the universe. And, I think we can say across the traditions, whether it's the Christian or the Kabbalistic or the Sufi tradition or whatever, it's constantly the need for silence. So the 20 minutes of silent prayer was so appropriate for today. Our lives are just full of chatter. They're full of noise. Everywhere you go, we live in a noisy world, and it's as if we have to keep filling every empty space with noise. The need for solitude, not so much the aloneness, but the aloneness with the thou of our lives, God, however we name that thou in our lives. Solitude is not so much being alone, it's in a sense being in the presence of the otherness that is the very source of my life. And I think surrender goes hand in hand with that, yielding to that power of love that is the source and sustenance of our lives. But we act today as if we're alone and that we have to make our way to God, when Teilhard is saying no. And many of the mystics will say the same thing. No, God is in a sense already here within you, around you, before you. Our task is to let go and to yield to this power of love who is within us. So as my friend Charlotte Tomano, a neuropsychologist, says, when the inner reality is stronger than outer reality, one can act from choice, creating one's own life. And we know that even from our own experience, right? When we are not sort of dictated from the outside, this compulsion of, I need to do this, I need to do that, and we find ourselves so frazzled today, so thinned out, and we're just surviving. Truthfully, I think a lot of our lives are just coping from one day to the next. When the mystics are saying when we live from the inside out, we are living out of a new center of freedom, a new center of being in the world. So Beatrice Buteau, wonderful philosopher, follower of Teilhard, says, the more conscious the individual becomes, the more the individual becomes person. Because we begin to recognize as conscious being our intrinsic relationality. First, that the I is no I apart from a thou. Second, that thou is living in every person, in everything that we encounter. So she says each person is person. Person in the sense of relational being, only to the extent that we live freely by the life of the whole. Our task today is really to become persons, to become the deeply relational beings that we have the capacity for. And many of the mystics, this is the great Sufi mystic Mansur al-Hallaj in the 10th century, recognizing the deep presence of God within as the very source of his own life. I saw my Lord with the eye of my heart, and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Yourself." Or Meister Eckhart, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." That to recognize this intricate, intertwined presence of divinity, love, at the heart of our lives must empower us in a new way. And this, in a sense, by the way, I spell this out in a book coming out in April called A Hunger for Wholeness on Soul, Space, and Transcendence. There's a much bigger story here, but this is the sum of it. The inner universe and the outer universe are really the one universe in the two dimensions. I think we have constructed lives in the modern period based on the outer universe, disconnected in some ways from the inner universe, which we have privatized and individualized. But what we are saying is that inner universe, when consonant with the outer universe, means that the universe has a cosmic soul. It means that this soul can expand and bind us toward a future together. And what does that mean? That expansion means we have the capacity for more love. And by love, I mean seeing the good in one another. I mean the power to forgive one another, the power to be merciful to one another, the power for peace. We have the capacity for more unity, and therefore we have the capacity for more life. And this is the basis, both Teilhard and Beatrice say, that is the basis of human personhood, and therefore the basis of a new moral order. Not based on moral absolutes or, this kind of rigid moral casuistry sometimes, or causality, but based on an ethics of the choice for love and the choice for compassion and the choice for forgiveness. So, what from the cosmology into the physics, into the life of the mystics, we are saying that the outer world and the inner world are actually one world flowing, and they need one another. You cannot have a sustainable outer universe without the inner universe. The mystics who have come to that deep sense of unity in their lives recognize what Maria Rainer Rilke called the outer space within. The outer space within. Through every being, single space extends. So that someone like Francis of Assisi could see the stars and the moon and the sun as family, sister moon, sister stars. That wasn't just a poetry of expression, it was a deep sense of unity with the cosmos, a deep sense that consciousness is light in this way. It would be very interesting. I don't know if, physics, I'm sure there have been studies on consciousness and light. To become enlightened is to have a new level of consciousness. And so, this sense of seeing that the whole out there is the whole in here, and the whole in here creates the whole out there. So that without the inner universe, I think we are, as Teilhard says, we are busy building a world without, but the world we want must first be found within. We are moving in the opposite direction of where life is calling us to. And therefore, what the mystics, in a sense, convey to us is that consciousness, out of its own freedom, a consciousness born out of freedom and love, is the source and power of everything. Again, I think Jesus is saying that in his own way. Where your mind is, there your heart lies, your treasure. And Teilhard himself spoke of religious experience. Now, I would say Teilhard was a mystic. He had that deep inner universe alive in his sense of evolution, his sense of the whole. He spoke of religious experience as having evolutionary significance. Now, we don't think like that. We think religion constrains and binds us. It's a set of laws and moral absolutes. And he's saying, no, religion, in a sense, belongs to the inner dimension of life. And he's saying that if we attend to that dimension, that, it then becomes the power of centration in the universe. He's saying that God Omega, and by Omega he means the absolute center of wholeness, that absolute center of love, is, in a sense, pulling the universe through the human. So the human is, he says, is the evolutionary spearhead of the universe, because we have the greatest capacity to be pulled. We have memory, intellect, and will. We can be intelligent. We can make choices. And therefore, we can make an option for love. We can choose God. And this is in a sense, what I see as the Teilhardian religious cosmos. In a sense, the universe, that inner universe, being, in a sense, centered in love, pulled by God, and therefore we become centrating centers in the universe. The point of religion, according to Teilhard, is not to be saved from this thing. The whole point of religion is to become centers and centrating in the universe. He calls it a process of cosmic personalization. As we become whole, we help make whole that world around us. So this notion of personalization means, in his view, which is kind of interesting, that only, he says, inner transformation can escape cosmic entropy. It is quite interesting, right? After 13.8 billion years, we haven't worn down. In fact, it's getting more complex. More complex being, higher levels of consciousness. And so that's what he's saying, is that, in a sense, consciousness and love is driving the whole kit and caboodle towards higher levels of consciousness and love. And now that is taking place in a particular way in us. So it means that, in a sense, I look at the universe this way. The whole universe is sort of Theotokos, from a religious perspective. The whole cosmos is giving birth. In a sense, if we take Mary as, you might say, the model of Christogenesis, her yes, her surrender, her listening to God, in a sense, is what we're about. Our yes to God's love, our yes to the fact that we are not in control. We may live with the illusion of control, but in a sense, without that surrender to God's love, this universe cannot center itself in love. And in a sense, when we talk about incarnation, that yes to love is saying yes to the divine presence to become radiant in our lives. That's what we mean by we say Christ is born. So what, in a sense, my friend Martin Laird says, far from escaping the evolutionary structures of the world, the mystic actually refines those structures. The connection here, and this is why I think it's important for contemplative outreach, the deep connectivity between the inner universe and the outer universe, between centering prayer and where the structures of this universe are going. The power of the Spirit, the power of love to bind together into a higher unity. So Martin says, through divinization, through that divine love becoming incarnate in the mystic then becomes a doorway through which Christ Omega enters and transforms the world in the divine milieu. The whole thing then is, in a sense, this birthing of Christ from within. It's hard for us to get our heads around sometimes because we're pretty sure it's like an MGM movie, It's all, Christ's going to come on the clouds and whisk us all away type thing. Rather than the way this universe, in a sense, is organically in this ongoing movement of convergence and centration. So we can say, as the mystic goes about the world, urging all things toward unity. And by mystic here, I mean that person who lives in that deep presence of love, who sees that love. In other words, to see out of a different center. The mystic sees out of a different center. The mystic, in a sense, thinks out of a different center. And the mystic acts out of a different center. a center that moves towards unity. And by unity, I mean, I don't want to be too naive about this. It's not that every day is a beautiful, happy day, right? You know, many of the mystics, quite honestly, went through profound periods of suffering. And to think that we can love without suffering is truly, you know, beautifully a Cinderella story that's completely naive. In fact, the more you love, probably the more you will suffer. And the commitment to love, therefore, is a commitment to surrender one's life in and through the suffering into something higher. And therefore, this kind of movement towards unity through this mystical convergence is then the movement to see everything in this web of love. I do think that what Teilhard's notion of this inner universe, this role of consciousness in relation to love, is about reclaiming what Plato called, you know, the soul of the universe, the cosmic soul. We have nothing that binds us, in a sense, together. And yet physics is saying, you know, we are bound together in an energy of interrelatedness. And so what we are saying here is the more we become conscious of the immensity and even more the organicity of the world around us, the more necessary for a soul to make itself felt. This is Teilhard. He says that is a soul capable of maintaining and directing the vast process of planetization in which we are involved. The world soul. Bring back the world soul. We need a bumper sticker to that effect, you know. Because, you know, truthfully, we are bound, and we know this, you know, when we get beyond all these polarizing differences, you know, your religion is not my religion, you're this and I'm not that. You know, when we get beyond those seeming differences and we go deeper, we find that really there's one heart at the heart of this whole cosmic process, and that is, I think, that absolute center of love, that omega. And you know, when we get beyond our differences and we say the God in me is indeed the God in you, we are more alike than we are different. So what Teilhard says is something will explode if we persist in trying to squeeze into our old tumble-down huts the material and spiritual forces that are now on the scale of the world. How prophetic! He's writing this in the 30s and 40s. But of course, he is now witness to 2 world wars, right? The First and Second World Wars. In his view, competition, specialization, and individualism formed by logic and control must give way to a new collective spiritual energy as the prime energy of an emerging new world. Spirituality is, in a sense, the energy that can centrate us and move us forward towards new life together. Beatrice says, an entire attitude and mindset, the way of identifying self and others and perceiving the world, must first shift. In other words, we must shift interiorly before any economic, political, and social arrangements can be made. Anything else, she said, is premature, useless, and possibly dangerous. In other words, they're looking and they're saying we need to flip the whole fabric of life inside out. And we're actually working against ourselves at this point. So I think what we need to realize is that we are living in an unfinished universe. Actually, that is the good news. I'm not sure it's in Scripture per se, but I think that's, you know, maybe that's the heart of resurrection. The I, what we call the I, is God's creative activity. God is not finished. It's not like I made you and just work it out for yourselves. You know, that the very language of I means we are not alone, right? You know, there's the thou there. And so that God's acting, God's loving is the present moment. We are now, the now of God's creative love. And when we are mindless of that love, when we you know, throw that love out, we then hamper and distort God's ongoing creative activity. So it's to realize that we evolve to never stop evolving. You know, and so many people are like, oh, God, that's evolution stuff again, you know, I just like, you know, get over with it and let's just carry on, you know. It's like, oh no, there is no carrying on to what, right? We are always in the process of growing, changing, becoming something. To the point where Beatrice said creativity may be seen as the real interior meaning of the act of faith. We believe so that we may love, and in that love we grow into something new. So in her view, we must begin to live, in a sense, always on the cusp of the future, addressing the other person just at that point where that person is on the act of creating the next moment of life. Rather than bringing all our past, all our biases, all our judgments, you're supposed to be this and you're not that, we're talking here living out of an inner space that is on the same magnitude of an expanding universe as the outer space. That when we meet one another, we are meeting one another on the cusp of an expanding universe. So she says if we really accept creation as ever new, and if we find ourselves active participants in this ever new creating, then we are always, always facing the future. Perspective is everything, right? How we see is how we love. So, I see our time here, so I'm going to just kind of do this shortly, but Teilhard really came up with a whole new way of approaching ethics from the point of evolution. I'll just take points 2 and 3. What he says is what constitutes the good is everything that brings the growth of consciousness to the world. And what is best and what assures the highest development of consciousness and thus the spiritual growth of the earth. The discernment of choices is the discernment of the whole and what is enhancing a consciousness of the whole. So, in his view, a new morality of growth is one that fosters and catalyzes evolutionary change. A growth into a new formation of being. So it's not just about right and wrong, good and bad. It's a reconstituting things about being part of a whole and deepening that whole together. Basically, we can only build the world together if we are becoming persons together. As long as we remain in this, you or I, me versus you, we are on a downward trend of devolution. And, Teilhard was not so naive that he wouldn't think we have the power to evolve and we have the capacity to devolve. And at one point he said we must either evolve or we're going to annihilate ourselves. So what he was trying to say and throughout his many writings is that religion, the inner universe, so to speak, it needs to empower the evolutionary process. It needs to be realigned with the cosmos. Religion needs to find a new alignment with the whole. And that means taking responsibility for the earth, for the future, and for evolution itself. Because it's not just about us, it's about the generations that will follow us. It's about your children, your grandchildren, and their children. What are we becoming up ahead? So again, just to recap, we need, again, I think, truthfully, I think contemplative outreach, and I think centering prayer and contemplation is the way of the future. This is, in a sense, the very power that is needed to move forward. But we need to connect it with the larger whole, and therefore we need to be conscious and make choices for solitude, for cyber fast, for unplugging our devices, right? For harnessing our energies of love. To recognize that, what is flowing in us flows around us. So we need to connect in a way that we are always relating, discovering, creating, and learning, that we are growing and we're growing in and through the whole of which we're a part. Here I'll just concentrate on the first and last points here. I think inner evolution can do well with the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, as we call them, right? And the first Beatitude is poverty. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Right, Matthew says poor, Luke says poor in spirit. And we've taken that to mean literally, I'm going to give my stuff away, and I'll go to heaven. But I think Jesus was inviting us into the new flow of life by letting go of the need to control and possess, to recognize that God is here in our midst, to trust and surrender that God, so to let go and let flow into the greater wholeness of life, which is, I think, what kenosis and openness brings about. Because that's how Christ, in a sense, emerges. Christ as divine love incarnate, enfolding through us when we allow that love to take root in us. And as that love takes root in us, in a sense, not only are we then flowing into a new future, we then are part of this spiritual, you might say, spiritual birth up ahead that is creating anew. Eddie Hillesum, who I bring along with me once in a while, that fantastic young Jewish writer, says, each of us moves things along in the direction of war every time we fail in love. To think that we are not part of the problems of today is extremely naive. First of all, to what science is telling us, and to then what we are about in this evolutionary whole. Eddie said at one point, she's writing, by the way, out of a concentration camp. Why is there war? Because now and then I might be inclined to snap at my neighbor, because I and my neighbor and everyone else do not have enough love. Yet, she says, there is love bound up inside us, and if we could release it into the world a little each day, we would be fighting war and everything that comes with it. We have the capacity for greater unity, for forgiveness, for compassion. Sin, in this paradigm, is living in the exile of unrelatedness. It's the individualism. It's the kind of, I don't need this stuff, I don't want to be part of this stuff. I'm very happy by myself, thank you very much. So every time we resist being part of the whole, then we are part of the fragmentation of that whole and the thinning out of it. Teilhard, in his optimistic way, did see that we are moving towards something. And I think today we are experiencing forces of resistance to evolution, because nature continues to be nature. Nature is now on the level of the human, in a sense summed up in the human, but we are fighting against it. But what Teilhard said is, this planetization is, in a sense, this movement towards, you might say, a co-reflection, a thinking on a new level together, which he saw that computers can do for us. A new sense of religions coming together and harnessing their spiritual energies for the good of the earth. A new deepening of heart and mind. But he also said, we're losing a zest for life. We're sort of in this survival mode, and we don't experience sort of that joy of life, that zest, that willingness, we don't. What he calls us to is a larger vision of hope, a sense of being in evolution, and therefore, in his view, a passion for looking toward the future. A passion for it, not a fear of it. And that means having a conscious commitment of working together for the whole. In Teilhard's universe, we are part of a great mystery, of the mystery of God, the mystery of divine love, constantly taking birth in our midst, in and through us, and in a sense, omega, being connected to this whole. In his view, all that we do affects all other wholes, and we are part of all other wholes. So, I think Pedro Rupe, that wonderful Jesuit, really summed it up for me in his way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. We are, maybe at the end of the day, we are the sum of our loves. So he says, fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. Commit yourself to love and be conscious of what you love, right? Teilhard said that love alone can bring us to the threshold of another universe. We have this capacity. And this is, in a sense, what Taylor says, this is the capacity of what drives evolution itself. So, what Karl Rahner says, in his own way, the Christian of the future, and maybe the human of the future, will be a mystic, someone who will be living from the inner universe into the outer universe, or we will not exist at all. Thank you.
Wow. Take a 10-minute break.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Can take a little break. You want a little break? Okay.
We're going to take a 10-minute break.
So there are a lot of really good questions here, and I'm going to try to cover as many as possible. And I think if I don't cover them today, maybe we'll cover them in my blogs on the Omega Center. So, because I think you're asking questions that a lot of people, are asking as well. One of the questions here is on the problem of evil, and that question comes up a lot. If the reality is love, how does the reality and problem of evil fit into the evolution of consciousness and the connection and the connectedness of the cosmos? I think, to keep in mind that evil is absurd. It's a distortion of love. It's a distortion of the good. To justify a place for evil in this universe is in the same way like to justify the place for cancer, or like if you look at the body and you say, well, where will the tumor grow here? You would never do that, right? It's an absurdity. It's a distortion of what should be normal. And so, Dionysia, the pseudo-Dionysia says the evil is actually an absence of the good. And I would say nature suffers, but humans make choices that result in evil. Evil means that it works against the good. It quenches that good. It can throw it into this kind of diabolical vortex. And so rather than giving a justification for evil, I think it's to recognize that we can distort love. We have the capacity to quench the good, and therefore we can, in a sense, create a space where that distortion leads to the absence of love, which is evil. Someone said the omega is, an electrical symbol of resistance. For you, those of you in electrical engineering, that's really interesting. And what we're saying on the part of God is just the opposite. It's the symbol of attraction. So it's kind of, I just thought that was interesting. Any thoughts on why the incarnation occurred at that time? This is an important question because what we are saying in this paradigm is it doesn't occur at that time. The whole of cosmic evolution is incarnation. God loving this universe into being is God incarnating God's self in this evolution. So when we talk about Christ in evolution, that's what we're saying. It wasn't that it was this material universe moving along and then God decided, hey, I think I'll come into this, whole thing. Like a Superman, come the outside. Rather, it's love at the beginning. That's what we call the primacy of Christ. The whole thing is Christic from the beginning. And it's the unfolding, you might say, of God's incarnating love. So Jesus becomes like the new Big Bang. In other words, in Jesus, we see this, God explodes, you might say, in a conscious, explicit way. So just to clarify that. How should we think about the consciousness of robotics or AI? Don't. No. No, it's really an important question, actually, because this is where a lot of research is moving, right? We're going to download the brain. We're kind of building humanoid robots. So robots that will not only look like us, but they'll be able to make conscious decisions. So it's a serious question because unbridled, it can lead to all sorts of consequences down the road for us. And that's why I think we need to bring technology in dialogue with religion. We need to bring it with an evolutionary type of theism, where we have some sort of boundaries or guidelines to what we're doing with technology. I think unbridled technology can be a dangerous future for us. We don't know where we'll go with it. The question exitus in reditus, this was the classical metaphysical notion that everything comes from God and will return to God. That notion, and what we're saying is, in just kind of reshaping that idea, we don't live in a circular metaphysical paradigm. We live, in a sense, in an expanding religious paradigm where we're saying that God is loving us into something new up ahead that is more whole, more being in love. So that the fullness, and here's where a classical theist might differ from a process theologian like Teilhard or Whitehead would say that God is, in a sense, coming into that fullness of God, or God's being is in God's becoming. This would be Wolfhard Pannenberg, the German theologian. So this notion of, this becoming in God, and is God becoming as well in us, is still an open question in terms of theology. Someone asked if this is an axial age for human evolution, what might be the event of punctated equilibrium that precipitates the next leap? Teilhard did not speak in terms of punctated equilibrium, but we now know that evolution can work, in this kind of long periods of stability and then kind of this leap into something new. We are in a new age. Our level of consciousness has clearly shifted from the 20th into the 21st century. I grew up in New Jersey. I never heard of of Muslims or Hindus. I grew up in an Italian-American neighborhood. I thought everyone was an Italian-American. I thought God was an Italian-American, truthfully. So, my consciousness has expanded and our consciousness has shifted. So we are in what's called today a new axial period, right? A new axis of religious consciousness, and that is shifting what we're becoming as humans. So, I think Christianity, quite honestly, this is actually my next book that I want to write on Christianity as a planetary religion. I think we need to understand it as a religion of the whole. I do think it was politicized early on and has a whole history from there. Okay, we did that. There was a question, there's a number of others here, so just hold on. What are your beliefs of our universe neighbors? And does that mean something like cosmic life? In other words, like other planetary life? If I can take that in that respect, like life on other planets, cosmic neighbors. Are they part of the new cosmos and part of God's plan without knowing Christ? Sure. Hey, why not? God loves everyone, Okay, fears about AI abuses. Again, yes, I think, let me just go back to the AI question. Look, AI is accelerating because we're buying it, truthfully, and we're using it. So it's not just like there's this thing called AI out there. It's developing because there's something about us that is fostering its development. And we haven't given sufficient critical reflection to why or how or where do we want to go with AI. It may be the most pressing question of our age because the evolution of our species is moving towards what some are calling technosapiens or cybersapiens, part human, part machine. So we're not just cyborgs, we're in a process of cyborgization. And we're unconscious to it. And that's why sometimes religious people can have their minds here, whereas cyborgization is changing culture and everything about us here. So I would just say, get together with your neighbors and talk, There's an idea. At this point in our evolution, if God is pulling us into the future, what propels and orients us to something new? So that's a good, interesting question. If God is pulling us into the future, because God is that future, right? That's what we mean. God is that future. God is always arriving in the present from the future, and God is that future pulling us into something new. What propels us? And here we can say, I think with Teilhard, that it is love. We become, in a sense, what we love. And that really is, shorthand speaking. And love is always a matter of, what we attend to. what we're aware of. I mean, if it's having the latest computer or car or lots and lots of money, then that's going to dominate my consciousness, right? If I love money, I'll look like a dollar sign up ahead, right? With no personality. So what propels evolution from a Teilhardian perspective really is love, conscious love, I would say. For young people disillusioned with religion, how can they find guidance? This is an important question. I truthfully teach undergraduates these days, and I don't think religion's the problem. I think we have a misguided notion of religion sometimes. I think too often, and this was Teilhard's lament, we confine religion to institution, right? When the deepest root of it means that we're bound to something. As Ronner would say, we have a withering of there's something that pulls us. We're oriented to something outside ourselves, beyond ourselves. In a sense, that's the best of what religion means. And it's sort of religion is what gives meaning and definition and then provides symbols and myth to that pulling. So I think spirituality is the energy of that pull. Religion is, in a sense, of the locus of that pull. Unfortunately, we are not making sense of the big story with, the unfolding universe within in terms of religions, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Christianity. So I do find we have a great need, first of all, to awaken to what science is telling us about the universe story. Second is we have a need to reconnect our inner lives, with this story. And I think we can do that in small groups. You don't have to belong to a church yet to do that. I think centering prayer is one good, and contemplative outreach is a good place for that. Third is, maybe church does need to evolve. There's a novel idea. If religions are evolving, our sense of community, what binds us together, that's the question of church, right? Ecclesia in the best sense. What gathers us in and empowers our lives to send us out in the world with a new zest of life, a new sense of belonging to the whole. Quite honestly, traditional religions and churches are not doing that too well today. They are they're more fragmenting than binding. I do see Pope Francis trying to move in his own way, but it's difficult, truthfully. Do you think we are able to experience our connectedness in new physical ways? I am thinking of the hidden life of trees and how they communicate. Absolutely. The trees are so much better off, by the way. I would say if you want to communicate better, become a tree. We have, here's again, I've used this word now repeatedly this afternoon. We have capacity. Capax Dei, capax affinity. We have the capacity for newness. We are not fixed beings. And I think the more we can understand ourselves this way, we are fluid, we are plastic, we can change, we can flow. We need to rethink what it means to be human, to know that our lines of communication absolutely can change. Our levels of relationship can change. Okay, we got through those. We got through that. Is there anything else? My definition of God. God, I don't want to be too narrow in defining God because we're talking about a mystery that does exceed the human mind, the capacity of the human mind to grasp, to logically define. But, I can say that my definition of God is that which has grasped me, at the center of my core and to which I am then, oriented to. That try as I might, I cannot get around or behind or away from that power of love and nearness and embrace. And so, I can give you the classic definition of God as that which no greater can be thought, but, does that move us anymore? That becomes more logical, and sometimes we want to fall into the trap of trying to explain God, rather than the experience of that which grasps us in our deepest interior self. How do I see the unconscious in our lives? Well, my bike accident may explain that one sufficiently. No, there are, look, the greatest mystery, by the way, is not God. We are the mystery. To think that we know what we are is the greatest fallacy we can commit. The human person is a tremendous mystery. And we have levels upon levels upon levels. We are not even, that's why the inner universe is so, we have conquered the outer universe tremendously. We don't even know yet the levels of the inner universe. So I know Carl Jung did a lot on the unconscious self in terms of symbols and archetypes, but I think we need to discover that inner self even more today in the 21st century. Again, we're selling out to technology without even knowing our own capacity and the expansiveness of our capacity as human persons. So, again, let's see. How are we doing on time?
Up to you.
Or up to me. How does being a Franciscan inform your understanding of consciousness and evolution? That's a really interesting question because a lot of my work actually is grounded in the experience of Francis of Assisi and in the incarnational theology of Bonaventure. And I see my work as sort of a 21st century of Bonaventure, version. And there's a lot of similarity between Bonaventure and Teilhard's Christocentrism and the sense of cosmic Christocentrism. So the short answer is it's affected it a lot, That's why I bring Francis into everything I talk about. Can you connect Teilhard's life-shaping work as a medic to his later work? This is an important question because a lot of people think Teilhard was sort of this naive optimist who, this lovely Jesuit who had nothing more to do than ponder, evolution and, faith. And that's just the opposite. I mean, Teilhard was a stretcher bearer in World War I, so he experienced death firsthand and a lot of suffering and death there. He lived a lot of his life in China, in the plains of China. So he was sort of like a 20th century desert father in that way. He lived out in the desert, so to speak. He did not have a cell phone. He did not have internet, so he had a lot of suffering in his life. I mean, his own family members, a close cousin died. His own being exiled by the Jesuits and rejected, basically, by the Jesuits and the institutional church. Unable to publish anything of his spiritual writings during his lifetime. So he never had the opportunity for criticism from others, a positive way, where he could refine his thoughts. And I would say he died. He had several heart attacks because I think the stress of being rejected all the time was really a lot to bear. I think Teilhard is one who knew suffering quite well. And he lived through that suffering, but he was deeply committed to his vision because there's something he intuited that what he was doing was, first of all, deeply in line with the early Greek fathers, that he was in line with St. Paul's writings, the Pauline notion of the cosmic Christ. He did not see himself as doing something so radically different, but he was trying to make Christianity a relevant religion to the world, what Vatican II is trying to do in its own way, And he's saying that this religion has become too detached, too abstract, and I think we can say this across Christian traditions, Protestant and Catholic, too removed from the reality of life. And that's what he's saying. Get real, all right? If you're going to be, get real and get religious because this is the power that moves life forward. So how do I address God when I pray? I say, hey, you, what are you doing? No, I'm only kidding. When you are praying and you envision God, what are you seeing? Retirement, actually. I'm like, it's looking better all the time. All right, I think it's 4:20. I want to thank you for coming, and I encourage you to read, and I encourage you to come together. Do not read by yourself. Read with another person. Discuss these ideas with other people. We're losing the point of human contact as we lose ourselves behind our devices, right, and our screens. The old AT&T commercial, reach out and touch someone. Human touch, the senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, that's what connects us to the wider world. Do not lose those senses. and do not forfeit them to electronic device too quickly. Deep in what we are, we have the capacity to become ultra-human. We have the capacity for a new world grounded in love and compassion and peace. We are that future. So good luck.